we taught? What's the saying? Never trust a salesperson. Yeah? Is that a fair call? Has everyone heard that at some point in their life? Yes or no? Yeah. Show of hands. Right, okay, so everyone in the room. So it's a fair call that that's something that is hardwired into our neurology. Yes or no? Right, now you think back to when we first learned that. We might have learned that when we were very little. Right, and it might have been just an off-the-cuff comment that our family was talking about. They said, "Oh, never trust a salesperson." Right, and they might have been talking to one of their friends. Or, you know, they're talking on the phone and you hear them say, "Oh, yeah, Marge, no, you can never trust those salespeople." Right? And so we just keep hearing this. And you know that term, that phrase, little pitches have big ears? So, you know, we're hearing all this stuff and we're just soaking it up. And so it becomes hardwired in our neurology. Then we have an experience. An experience when we get a little bit older with a salesperson who perhaps didn't quite do things the way they should have done. Yeah? And so that reinforces things, doesn't it, for us? So we have this feeling that's deeply entrenched in our neurology. Never trust a salesperson. Now what's happened with that is this. When we first learn something, and this is the neurological patterning that goes on in our mind. When we first learn something, that fires off an electrical impulse. Now that electrical impulse becomes like a fine, wispy connection. And that first learning ends up resulting in either, so it's a stimulus, which is the learning, results in a response or a meaning in our mind. Response or a meaning. So it either engages a response from us or we place a meaning on it, yes or no. Yeah. Right, so now, what happens is, the first time we get something triggered, it creates this fine, wispy-like connection to the meaning or response. However, our minds have protection mechanisms. And the reason we have protection mechanisms is so that we don't all end up in a crazy house. And I'll tell you a little bit about why that's important to understand. Okay, so protection mechanisms are this. Who's had, not necessarily earth-shatteringly, but it could have been some bad stuff happen to you in your life? Who's had some bad shit happen? Right, pretty much everyone in the room, yes or no? Right, okay. So now, if every single time something bad happened to us, that became hardwired in our neurology, we would be rocking in the corner drooling. Because we would not be able to cope. But what happens is our minds form in such a way to protect us from that. Because there are certain things we don't need to remember, or certain things we don't need because they don't serve us. So the intensity of the stimulus, or the frequency of the stimulus, determines on how permanent the stimulus, or the disconnection becomes. So what usually happens, however, with never trust a salesperson, for instance, it's frequency rather than intensity. Does that make sense? So frequency happens, and we get a lot of these little connections. Now what happens is the mind says, okay, that's something I need to remember. That's important to the function of this vehicle that I'm travelling in. This body that I'm travelling in. So what the brain then does, and this neurologically happens, is it creates, and it's a process called myelination. It creates a sheath around that neurological connection. Now that sheath is much like a conduit. You know, conduit wiring in houses, etc., etc. Okay. So now that connection now gets made permanent to the point where I say to you, what have we been taught about salespeople? And you go, never trust them. Because you've had this permanent neurological connection in your mind. So the minute you walk up, whether you're a real estate salesperson, whether you're a vacuum cleaner salesperson, whether you're a car salesperson, the minute you walk up and present, they are in the place where they will be looking for, what do you mean? And if the stimulus is anything like a salesperson, what's the automatic neurologically mapped response? No trust. Can you see how that works? So now, if there's an automatically, neurologically learnt response of no trust, what we should be eternally interested in is how do we undo that? Yeah? And by the way, this is something that most salespeople forget to even place any credits on. And the reason why I want to talk to you about this is because if you can unmap this from the beginning, you can make a massive difference to your sales. Massive difference. And I'm talking quite immediate. It used to take me 2 hours to build rapport with people. It now takes me 15 to 25 minutes to build a deep level rapport to where they're listening to everything I say.